As things continue to heat up overseas, we're seeing a massive change in oil prices, the global economy when it comes to the domestic strain and international tariffs. Um, and things continue to get even worse for people our age. Looking at how things are gonna start shaking out as the older individuals die and inheritances start to come, we're gonna see some things are not shaking out quite how we planned. Finally, socialist policy continues strain uh, to strain rent prices. We're going to talk about it all on this episode of Road to Riches. Welcome back to Road to Riches. I am your host, Niamki Buchanan, joined by my wonderful co-host, Matt White. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Unfortunately, last week I was out sick, so we're gonna be kicking it off pretty hard this episode with a lot of good things to talk about. Our first story actually comes um, on some economic data. Uh, Axios reports that the economy showed cracks before the Iran attack. Uh, says the economy was flashing stagflation signals, tepid growth, and high inflation even before the Iran conflict added an oil shock to the mix. During driving the news, a revision to fourth quarter GDP shows the economy grew at only a 0.7% annualized rate in the final months of 2025, half as much as the 1.4% growth rate originally estimated. Every time they put out numbers, whether it comes to jobs, inflation, GDP growth, anything like that, there's always a revision a few weeks or a couple of months later. And the reason for that is that they want to go through and verify all the data as well as get data from additional sources outside of just the initial speculation that the government sees, whether it's the Fed who's taken the data or the Bureau of Labor Statistics or any other economic organization. But this particular thing, the revision downward, is something that's very, very upsetting for us right now. Honestly, we've seen in the last few months, inflation has not decreased. Um, as we're recording on Wednesday, the 18th, actually, earlier today, the Federal Open Market Committee, through the Federal Reserve, they had their meeting and decided to keep interest rates the same. Only one director actually wanted to uh, uh, actually broke ranks, and he stated that he wanted to lower interest rates a quarter point. But the combination of all this data is really showing us that we are not in a good position to grow. Right now, we have been, as Axios shows, in a state of stagflation where everything is getting more expensive, but the economy is not growing in relation to it. Wages are not growing, unemployment is not going down. People are really starting to feel the strain, and we've seen that for months, but now the data is verifying that as well. Uh, what's your thoughts on that initial thing there, Matt?
Yeah, so looking at the current state of the economy, especially concerning that revised down, month over month GDP growth, down from, I believe it was in the 2% to 3% range, and it was revised down to 0.7%. Uh, you know, like you said, very upsetting. It showed again, like you said, that now our federal agencies are not necessarily convinced of the same thing that they were convinced of earlier in the year, after having 3 quarters of GDP growth at or above 3%. To have a quarter, a month over, or not month over month, quarter over quarter GDP growth of 0.7%, it's certainly signifying that people in the government and even investors and analysts on Wall Street are getting ready for a 2008 kind of situation, or certainly a market correction, particularly in the housing market. I mean, we're seeing record amounts of foreclosures on houses. We're seeing mortgage payments are beginning to fall through the cracks. We're seeing like we discussed earlier on the show, we're seeing inventory. We're seeing inventory times increasing for houses on the market. Concession, not cons- yeah, Seller concessions are beginning to increase as well. Just in my line of work, I've seen houses, decline in price, not just a little bit but by 50, $100,000, because people can't sell their homes. The home builders can't sell homes because rates are high, and the prices are so inflated that normal people in the economy can't afford to drop $400,000 on a new home. And it's frustrating for a lot of people. It's frustrating for us. My thoughts about everything, going forward, I would say that let's not ring the alarm bells just yet. The reason is because of how strong 2025 was. If we remember back in the second quarter of 2025, wage growth had actually outpaced inflation for the first time in 20 years. At that point, it hadn't done that since the 2000s. And again, we had three consecutive quarters of 3% or greater GDP growth. And then it was that fourth quarter where GDP still grew quarter over quarter, but it was revised down much lower than it was initially reported. The housing crisis, of course, um, is still alive and well. Although I would challenge the fact that the current state of the housing market has too much to do with how the economy as a whole is performing. And the reason I say that is because, again, it's not like these cracks in the housing market just showed themselves in the last quarter of 2025. It started way before that, and this has been a recurring problem, which tends to happen when prices continue to increase and increase until you price everybody out of the market, um, to where only the very wealthy and very liquid individuals can purchase these kinds of assets. Uh, and so, I would urge caution. A lot of investors on Wall Street, a lot of analysts as well. I was reading an article from the Wall Street Journal too that said a lot of people are they're not making any rash decisions right now as far as selling securities or getting out while they can, because even 2008 there were warning signs, massive warning signs. And it's not like the housing market just all of a sudden collapsed. Millions of people all of a sudden didn't pay their mortgages. It was a gradual process. And it really depends on people learning their lesson from 2008, and actually looking for the signs and not getting high off of their own press releases saying that the market will correct itself even after consecutive quarters, um, um, of the market not correcting itself, and the problem continuing to get worse. So I would urge caution in that regard. As far as the housing market as well, us and our audience, we're kind of looking at it with mixed feelings, because we're facing a housing market that is priced out of our reach, and we feel cheated a little bit, cheated by previous generations for not just continuing to buy it themselves because they're the only ones who can, but because of their actions, because of that massive demand from them. I mean, you know as well as I do, the the age of the median age of home buyers has continued to increase, and we feel cheated, and but at the same time, we worry about the economy on this show, and we nobody wants to see an economy collapse, um, and so we look at it with mixed feelings. At the end of the day, again, let's urge caution. Keep your eyes open, um, and hopefully the market corrects itself. Maybe it won't, but for sure, housing prices will continue to decline. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I do for the most part agree with that. Like I said, inflation is higher at 3.1% year over year for January. Again, revised numbers. We're seeing a strain. I mean, especially when it comes to gas prices right now because of the global situation. The war over in Iran. I mean, over the last 2 weeks, I've seen gas prices in my area go from 230 up to 360, and now they've come down a little bit. We're sitting at about 340 right per gallon right now, and of course for me that's just the 87 octane, so the cheap stuff. But I like the cheap stuff,
Right.
so the cheaper it is, the less money I spend. But it's still noticeable. When I go to fill up 2 weeks ago, I could get away with 32 dollars filling up my tank. Now it's 45 or more. It's just that much of a difference in that short a time. And so one of the main things that we are seeing the government taking an action on to try and stabilize and even lower some of those oil prices is going into our strategic reserves. They want to raid some of these things and make it and basically flood the supply of oil and gas into the economy. We're seeing that a little bit as well. Wall Street Journal reports that the International Energy Agency is going to, and this is a coalition of multiple countries, of course, but the IEA is saying that its member countries will release 400 million barrels of oil from their emergency stocks. And of course, this does include the US. So, um, should they do this, then we should see some decline of gas prices over the next couple of weeks, but it does take a little bit of time to work its way through the market. Something that's kind of funny is that I was on Twitter a few days ago, and there was this guy who posted a tweet. He was like, what doesn't make sense to me? When gas prices go up or something happens that makes gas prices go up, it's immediate. But whenever something happens that's supposed to make gas prices go down, why does it always take a couple of weeks to work its way through the economy? And it's funny because he's right. You would think that these companies would be approximately as quick going up as they would going back down, but the truth is they really do that so they can increase short-term profits a little bit. That's really all it comes down to. Because if they know that things are going to be more expensive in the interim, then raising their prices now a little bit is going to provide them more short term money so that way they can buy inventory at a higher, yes, rate than before. Um, but because they're spending less money overall at one time, then they're able to come back to us and raise the prices slowly until they get to their height. Versus on the other side of things, where now it's taking a little while for the prices to come back down because they still have to go through the inventory that they bought at elevated prices. So that's I know that's a little bit of a tangent there, but it was something funny to me, and I felt the need to talk about it. Going back to the article, says the release of oil would more than double the agency's biggest prior release when IEA member countries in 2022 put 182 million barrels on the market after Russia launched its full scale invasion of Ukraine. The decision is intended to counter the massive disruption caused by the near total closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that connects the Persian Gulf to global markets. So, like we said, we are expecting this cheap, quote unquote, oil to start working its way through the economy, bringing down oil prices in the short term. But of course, we still have to, try to figure out what we're going to do in the long term. Right now, Iran has they've attacked other Middle Eastern countries, which are pretty important when it comes to oil reserves as well. They've launched strikes, I believe, if I remember the line correctly, because it was a list of them. But I think I saw uh, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, I think Syria, and one other country. Um, I think it was Jordan actually. Those Middle Eastern countries that have a big responsibility for the production of global oil, whether it be to China, whether it be to Russia. The U.S. of course is actually fairly self reliant when it comes uh, to oil prices, but so that's trying to explain this a little bit more. So even though the U.S. is generally between 90 and 100% self reliant on energy, we still do export a significant amount of energy products. And so what we make in the country does get sent out. And when those companies that mine, think your Exxon, your uh, not BP so much now, but Shell, Marathon, etc. Those companies, when they mine, some of it they use to uh, for domestic oil. When we go to the gas pump, some they export to other countries, whether it be Mexico, Canada, etc. And when there's a strain on those other countries, then now they have less supply in their countries, which means looking at your supply demand curve, right? When the supply goes down, well, now everybody who still has some can charge a higher rate. So, in order for Exxon to justify selling the same amount of gas in the US, well, now we're going to see an increase in our price too, because there's only so much that they're producing, that they're mining or drilling. That is, that they're drilling and refining. So if they have to send more over to Canada, well, then they're going to charge more in America for the same amount.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm actually happy you brought up, the old faithful supply and demand curve, because that honestly, that's something that a lot of people forget about. In situations like these, and situations in their own lives, whether it be personal or professional. A lot of people, and I've read a lot of articles where even journalists seem to not understand the simple dynamics, the economic fact of supply and demand. And it rings true here. Now and you explained it perfectly, that now the rest of the United States does export a lot of its oil. Um, and in fact, Texas Intermediate, uh, and our crude, a lot of that does get exported, whether it be to Great Britain or whether it be to mainland Europe. And it does have an effect. Clearly, it's had an effect because of the Iranian conflict. And uh, I would and I would say this. I think that this release of oil by the IEA is just a temporary band-aid. I'm not really sure, the long term effects of a move like that. We can predict based on our own action when the Ukraine war broke out, when the Biden administration released millions of our own barrels of oil from our own strategic reserve. And it was a temporary band-aid. Anybody who went through the last few years of the Biden administration, knows that once he did that, gas prices declined a little bit, and then slowly but surely crept their way back up to where they were before. And so in this case, maybe it'll be another situation like that. Um, maybe it won't do anything at all, because we're talking about an international agency now, releasing reserves for the whole oil consuming world. And now that there's less supply, those players in the market can now demand higher prices for their oil. And you're starting to see this with the price of oil, whether it be for West Texas Intermediate, or whether it be for crude. Oil has surpassed $100 a barrel. I forget where it sits right now. I believe it's 110. Um, and however, I will also say a caveat to that fact is, it's not like oil hasn't. Speaking of the Biden administration, just 4 years ago at this point, when they did their own release of oil reserves in 2022, um, oil was at $120 a barrel. Well, no, that would have been 2024. Oil was at $120 a barrel in 2024, and had reached that high after their strategic reserve release had run out. And so let's not make the mistake of thinking that this is never happened before, because it has. And it's even happened without any conflict at all. This is not an endorsement of, oh, well, we should just, go get in as many conflicts as we can. Oil price, just because oil prices have gone up before, means everything's going to be fine. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, again, back to my previous point, let's not panic, and think that this is some novel thing that has happened. Um, the fact of the matter is, the international community is taking action, and the United States is also increasing its own production, uh, and we'll see what happens in the coming days. Let's hope for a, a quick end to the Iranian conflict. Um, but it's very possible that oil prices continue to increase. My prediction actually is that oil prices will, just because now the Strait of Hormuz is now completely closed. Iran has actually put mines in the strait to make sure nobody can get through. And like you said, the Iranian regime has actually bombed several Middle Eastern countries, including one of the largest oil producers in the world, and that would be Saudi Arabia, and one of their largest oil refineries. And so, time will tell what happens, but for sure, they've taken drastic action of their own to make sure. It certainly seems to make sure that the rest of the world suffers with them. Um, and all more reason for this conflict to come to a swift end.
Yeah, I mean, we all should be hoping for a swift end. I don't want to make things too political, but I was never a fan of any war in the first place. But I'm of the mindset where if we're going to be in this, then we need to do whatever we say we're going to do and get it done quickly. That way, we can get out with as few casualties as possible, and we can get Americans back to normal American life. But speaking of normal American life, at some point, of course, we are all going to die. And this takes us to our third story, where we have to talk about inheritance. CNBC, excuse me, reports that older women are set to inherit most of the $54 trillion in a quote great wealth transfer to widowed spouses. This seems like it should not necessarily affect us that much. After all, we all know that women have a longer lifespan than men. So, um, a 77, for example, year old man, if he passes, then his assets, excuse me, his wealth is going to be transferred over to his wife, who we still expect to live for a couple more years longer. Um, and this is exactly what it says, right? For many married women, one of the biggest financial transitions in their lives will come when it's least welcome after the death of their spouse. Go down a little bit. At birth, the average lifespan for males is 76.5 years as of 2024. For women, that average is 81.4 years. So the entire point is that all of us who have this expectation that when our parents eventually do pass away, then we will inherit whatever wealth is left, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. That's kind of the main point. And so we have on the show we have talked extensively about the amount of wealth that older individuals have, about the number of houses that they own, about the amount of total investment in the stock market that older individuals make up, even aside from institutional investors. So when we see articles like this, it just has us thinking, how much longer is it going to take before the wealth transfer to the younger generations actually happens? How long is it going to take before these houses get on the market? How much longer is it going to take before things start to be less expensive? And of course, as even in the short term, as more individuals start to retire over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of opportunities open up for management positions at businesses. A lot of businesses are going to be passed down to the next generation so that the older individuals can enjoy their retirement. We're going to see wages increase just as a simple function of having a smaller worker base. And so that means that we have to plan for a hopefully more than nominal increase in real wages in the short term and use that to stockpile as much wealth as we can so that when these opportunities do become um, more abundant when it comes to the housing market, when it comes to upward mobility in your jobs, etc., when these assets start to flood the industry or flood the economy, we need to be ready to snatch them up.
Yes, and what's really interesting about this idea that this reality of baby boomer married husbands passing away and passing their wealth on to their wives directly instead of their children or what have you is you know the baby boomer women wives were statistically overlooked, and an argument can be made they still are statistically overlooked as far as financial advising or financial management is concerned. A lot of it was catered towards a male audience, and what I mean by that is these baby boomer men. I mean, they were the ones who had their 15 house portfolio. They own their landlord businesses, their holding companies, and they were the ones who put in a lot of work to manage their large portfolios. And so now that all of their assets are being transferred to their wives, who could afford, who I imagine a lot of them could afford to sit back just enjoy retirement themselves, and enjoy going from place to place with their husband, but not for the same purpose as him, just for the purpose of being with him. Um, now these people find themselves in a puzzling situation where they're now in charge of portfolios, and of course, as you and I both well know, bad management, or inattentive management, can certainly have an effect on wealth creation and wealth stability within companies, corporations, or people. And so, now we're probably going to end up seeing a lot of organizations, a lot of banks, both investment and commercial, cater their strategies a little bit to appeal more to the widows who are statistically um, gaining a larger and larger amount of the nation's capital, because of the passing of their husbands. Um, and so, a couple things on that is, I uh, I don't think that it's necessarily surprising that that boomers are necessarily passing their wealth on to their wives first before distributing out to their children. And I hate and I personally have a little bit of a vendetta against boomers, and so I'll say this with a grain of salt. Um, I find it puzzling that they're doing that. Although in their defense, it's possible that they see their kids as just knowing how much money they have, and simply wishing for their quick passing so they can have it. You can dislike somebody's financial decision while also acknowledging or understanding where they came from with that. And but getting back to the point, I think that the strategies are certainly going to be changed by investment institutions and financing institutions to cater towards the wives who now hold a majority of the nation's capital, or who continue to receive more. And it's going to be interesting to see what these boomer women end up doing with this newfound money. It's very possible that they simply sit on it and let it cash flow, and and it takes another 10 years before they ever let go of it. And so, unfortunately, that would mean that there's not necessarily going to be a change at all as far as um, as far as the economic situation. The only thing that may change a little bit is, now, instead of trying to grow and grow, we're going to see a situation of perhaps economic stagnation, where the people with all of the nation's capital end up just sitting on their wealth, and letting it cash flow, and letting the rental properties pay, as it were, and just enjoying the rest of their lives that they have, instead of taking the present value of everything they have, meaning selling their assets, liquidating, and then enjoying their retirement with their older and younger millennial children. So you are right. We may have to wait if we're looking for a better economic situation, which, in my opinion, was all started because of the selfishness of previous generations, and one of those would be the boomer generation. But speaking economically, you're right. It's going to take a little bit for the economy um, uh, to continue to recover, if this is the case. Just looking at generational trends and how they spend their money.
Uh, yeah, 100%. I don't want to be the guy that says, hey, we need these people to go ahead and give us our inheritance and move out the
Right,
way,
right.
because we do love our parents and our grandparents, for our younger audience. And we want them to live long and prosperous lives. But something that I'm somewhat embarrassed to say, but it's really kind of a joke, is that for the last couple of years or so, my parents have been getting my brother and I more involved in their financial planning, because my parents are older. They are having health issues. They are getting to the age where, if we haven't already planned some of these things, we do need to say, what are we going to do when you get, too old to take care of yourself? Are we going to put you in hospice care? Do we want to do like live in house care? Do we want to, you know, bring you out where we are and care for you ourselves? Whatever the case is. And as the children in this situation, we do need to be planning for these things, but we also need to be on have the conversation with our parents and our grandparents on the financial side of things as well, saying, do we have the money for these things? And then even if we do, and we expect there to be inheritance left over, how have you planned for that transition? The laws are different in every state, whether the the surviving spouse is automatically entitled to any amount, and if so, how much that is, whether the children are automatically entitled to any amount, and if so, how much that is, what other individuals may have a claim to this estate, and of course, having a will is definitely going to make that process easier, instead of having to go through the courts. But getting to the actual sad slash joke slash arrogant part of this is that my parents have told me repeatedly that it's their money. They're the ones that earned it. They don't want to leave anything to me when they go away. Meaning they want to enjoy the rest of their lives having spent everything that they've earned. And I get it. It's your money. You're the one that has a right to it. You're entitled to use it, to your benefit. But on the other hand of things, the selfish part does come in, where I don't want to say that I am entitled to anything that they have produced, but looking at how difficult things are for the average person, I still do maintain some expectation of inheritance. So that way I will be able to go out and try to build more wealth for myself and eventually the family that I create. It all comes down to this idea of generational wealth, basically. What is it that the wealthy individuals do, and how can we structure our lives to be as much like theirs as possible? That doesn't mean that we need to go out and buy mega yachts and splurge on $5 million mansions and take 6 months off to go travel and backpack up in across the European Union, for example. We don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you don't have the money for it. I mean, I don't have the money for it. My family doesn't have the money for it. We can't do those types of things. But the other things that they do, when they set up trusts and other things for their children to minimize the tax burden, where they have lawyers involved with creating wills and managing their estate, so that way the government gets as little as possible, and the money is actually given to the children for things that make sense in a way that makes sense. These are the types of things that you should be having conversations with the older individuals in your life about. Do they have a plan for when they go, and what is it? Even if you don't get anything, which I hope that you do, because again, the idea of generational wealth requires wealth to be passed down so that way it can grow. It takes money to make money. We always hear that. But again, that's it. That's kind of the dichotomy. Where do we draw the line between this is yours and and you're entitled to use it versus what about the future of your legacy?
Right, and while you were explaining that, I was thinking about the old Keynesian fallacy of the old Keynesian fallacy of the thief who throws a brick through a store owner's window, and the idea that somehow this is a bad thing for the store owner, but it's a good thing for the overall economy, certainly in the long run. And why? Because now the glass repairman, or in this case, just replacing the glass, has a job. He now has a job to replace the broken glass. And the thief is actually doing, by that logic, the thief is doing a service to the economy. And well, it doesn't seem relatively relevant. It doesn't seem relevant to the matter at hand. It sort of is. Uh, you were trying to find a gracious way to explain, how older generations, not just leaving money, but leaving, you know, actual assets, like businesses or rental properties or things like that, in leaving those for their kids. You were trying to find a gracious way to say why them not leaving those things is a bad thing. And my response to the whole situation is, well, it's a bad thing because it's nations have grown, especially the United States. The United States has grown significantly from family-owned assets. The United States has benefited largely from, whether it be from native-born Americans who own family-owned businesses, whether it be from the family businesses that were established during the Great Immigration of the early 20th century, that some of which still exist today, some of which were created decades later and still exist today. That's how nations grow. As far as an economic measure, uh, I would argue that actually, it's bad for the economy that that doesn't happen. That older generations keep everything for themselves until the day that they die, and on top of that, spend everything. And that's really the parallel between the Keynesian window fallacy and this situation, which is we're going to pretend like the older generation spending every last dime that they made, liquidating every last asset that they had, is good for the economy. I was talking a couple weeks ago about how the tax system inherently encourages people to spend immediately, because long term they will just lose money if they decide to save, if they decide to invest. Um, and it's the and so in this situation, it's not good to spend right now and not leave these things for future generations to continue to produce more wealth for the country, to produce more wealth for your family, and even take care of you during your retirement. Because if they, especially if they already know the business, if they've been taught properly by you as the principal, um, they would be far more capable of taking care of you, in, being the new management in your whether it be your property, whether it be your property holding company or your retail company or what have you, than you would if you just simply liquidated it all. Um, and that even goes for housing and real estate. Another thing I'll say is that, in my opinion, it's bad for the family, short term and long term. I mean, now you're talking about burning bridges, but not only that, uh, you're talking about leaving your children in a worse place than they were before. You're you. I get teaching children I get teaching children and people in general that they need to, be able to provide for themselves. They they shouldn't depend on handouts. They shouldn't, quote unquote, need any help from anyone. They should be able to be self-sufficient. And I believe that's a very important principle. And it's very important to teach people, especially children. But but now we're talking about, okay, well, I'm even if I've already taught you this principle of self-sufficiency, I'm going to continue to just spend everything myself. I'm not going to leave you anything. I'm going to force you into this situation and essentially start our family off from square one, which, in my opinion, is not very good. And finally, I want to, um, like you established your point, better establish your point. I would like to better establish mine, which is I, of course, do not want. I'm not advocating for older generations to hurry up and die. I don't want. I don't even want them. Uh, I don't even want to force them to make one decision or the other. I simply would like them to make the better economic decision, and to leave things to their children. And I would also like them to live a happy and uh, a happy rest of their retirement, happy rest of their life. And I don't think that the way to do that is, not only spend every last dime that you have, but in the process, more than likely burning bridges within your own family. Um, all of that being said, you know, moving forward from, again, the $1 trillion handover from husbands to spouses in the boomer generation, um, hopefully what we see is the stagnation of capital within that generation. The reason is because they're currently, let's face it, they had all of the capital. They're currently the only ones who can afford these large assets that were simply priced out of. Um, we will see what happens in the future. I hope those thoughts were helpful. I got a little off topic, but there are important points to be made that we shouldn't wish. We, of course, don't want anybody to go ahead and pass away simply because their generation has made things more expensive, has instituted policies that go towards, uh, you know expensive, assets like cars and houses and things that we want and that they had when they were our age. um, we and we So we can do that. We can not wish for anybody to pass away or anything like that, and also at the same time acknowledge that, the economic fact that you guys and your carelessness with, money that wasn't yours, your continuous borrowing from future generations that we are now responsible for paying back, whether it be in the form of the national debt, or the increased price of assets like houses and cars that we no longer can afford. It's led to a lot of bad things in the economy, and we have a right, just like you would if we did the same thing to you, to be upset about it.
Exactly. I mean, you reiterated a lot of things that I said that were great points, but I mean, you just completely filled out the rest of the conversation that I think we need to have. Um, One thing that is very important, though, that I think we need to touch on at least a little bit more, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, given that we are coming up on the end of our time, and it's a topic that we've talked about before. But a significant portion of people have a significant portion of their wealth wrapped up in their homes, their home value. And as governments, city, state, and federal, continue to make affordable housing more difficult to come across, whether it's raising property taxes, whether it's instituting rent freezes, things like that on rental properties. I mean, it's continuing to make things unaffordable for both the property owners and the people who are looking to live in these particular properties. Our last and final story is taking us back to New York City to discuss this a little bit more. Wall Street Journal reports Zoran Mamdani's rental plan risks pushing small New York City landlords toward extinction. Again, these aren't the ones that own hundreds of homes. These are the individuals, the mom and pops, your parents, your grandparents that own their house and a handful more that they're trying to rent. These are the people that own, a single small apartment building, or they have a housing co-op, or they own condos or a townhome, or maybe even just a duplex that they live in one unit. These are the individuals that are hurting the most from these policies, where it becomes impossible to charge a reasonable market amount of rent for your property. And therefore, it's no longer affordable to repair the property, to maintain the property, to renovate the property, because they know that no matter what they do, the rent that they charge will not be able to cover their mortgage payments that they may still have on the property, plus the property taxes that continually go up, plus all the other maintenance expenses and things like that. It is just becoming way too difficult for property owners to get a reasonable profit, if any profit at all, on these properties, and therefore they're not even a lot of them are not even being offered anymore. I've read so many stories of property owners and landowners with just a few units or just a few homes that are in these areas, and it like I said, it just becomes so unprofitable that instead of having people actually be in these units, they just let them sit vacant and essentially abandon the property, and we just have to hope that the city takes them over due to unpaid property taxes, and then someone comes in and swoops it up at a discount and makes it profitable, and people can live in these properties again. Because if we say there's a housing crisis, but it seems like everything the government's try to do just makes it worse.
Yeah, just briefly, it really seems like we're, especially New York City, but it can be extended to the nation as a whole, where we're entering a perfect storm of bad economic situations. You know, interest rates are still high, and inflation is over 3% month over month, and the housing prices are coming down, but they're still very high, and wages aren't growing at a rate that we would like them to, especially considering how expensive everything has gotten over the last 5 6 years. And so it really is a perfect storm of bad economic decisions. But in the case of New York City, what Mayor Mamdani is proposing is a is what is called a price ceiling. And while it's not stated explicitly that rent prices can't go higher, rent prices are frozen. So by just using logic, they can't move, and they can't, especially they can't move up either. So in terms of a price ceiling, when you going back to our old um, uh, old faithful supply and demand graph. When you hold demand at a certain level, you just all you do there is you create what is called a dead weight loss in the market, which represents all of the people that could not be serviced um, by the economy because of fiscal policy. In this case, a price ceiling. So somebody may be willing to pay, for example, $1,000 for rent in New York City. Unrealistic, but bear with me. Somebody may be willing to pay $1,000 for rent, but the price ceiling, the rent ceiling, is $900. Well, that's a dead weight loss. There is somebody who is no longer able to get an apartment, um, because even though they're perfectly willing to pay $1,000 because of this government policy keeping them out of the market. They're not priced out. They are just kept forcibly kept out of the market because of this price ceiling. And we call that dead weight loss. People who cannot be things in the economy that cannot be done because of fiscal policy. People who cannot be supply that can't or sorry demand that can't be met because of fiscal policy. Um, and because you put a cap on demand, and so there's this has happened before in New York City where they've instituted a price ceiling, um, and the exact thing that you mentioned, Nyanki, has happened where landlords can no longer afford, because of all of the rising prices of property ownership and of maintenance, can no longer afford to upkeep their own properties, and so they abandon them. And you may not believe it, but if anybody's ever walked the streets of New York City, you'll notice that it is, some parts is quite literally one of some of the dirtiest housing and apartment buildings you've ever seen, and a large part of that is because of this price ceiling that previous mayors have put as an effort to uh, uh, get a hold of prices in Manhattan and in greater New York City because of population growth or what have you. Bottom line is, it's a bad economic policy. If you want to tackle the housing crisis or the affordability crisis, this is not the way to do it. We've laid out many historically effective methods to do it, but continuing to regulate the market and continuing to push people out of the market is not the way to fix what's going on.
Yeah, completely correct there. We covered a lot in today's episode. We talked about how oil prices and the war and global situations are affecting not only inflation but also, um, you know, prices all across the board here at home. Um, how it's affecting our futures of inheritance and things like that. How we're even going to have to hold off on some of these things, and but more importantly that we need to have the discussions around wealth planning and estate planning, etc., and how we're going to handle those situations. And hopefully our parents and grandparents even can keep their houses despite all the things that are happening, so they can be eventually passed down. But that's all we have for you today. Again, I am your host, Niamki Buchanan, joined by my co-host, Matt White. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe to the podcast. New episodes come out every Thursday. Thank you very much for watching.